Yeah, welcome to Classpecting for Assholes, a Neurotypeline lecture by me, Barista. Yeah, first, why should you even care about this? What is classpecting? Why should you care at all? Well, first of all, it helps you understand Homestuck, if that's something you're into. It's a new lens to take through the comic, again, if you care about Homestuck, and yeah, understand some characters on a reread or maybe like 500th read. There's always more to learn. But what if you don't care about Homestuck? What if you just care about personality matrices and such? Well, it's just a new way of looking at people and the world. The human mind loves pattern recognition, and it's like Myers-Briggs. Whatever, if these categories are useful or not, it's just something interesting to look out for in the world. And be like, I can see how these things are somewhat related and interconnected. And most importantly, you can give yourself a cool-ass title. It can be a Knight of Space or something like that. And what higher goal, what more noble goal could there be than to indulge your vanity? Also, I guess if you're a writer or something, like, these roles are obviously a great thing to craft characters around. That's probably what they're there for. But oh well. For now, I'm assuming I have two audiences here. One which cares about Homestuck and wants to hear about classpecting, and one who's here for the usual channel content, which means personality matrices and such. I will try to limit discussion of both to absolute minimum. We'll just talk about classpecting. That's it. For now, this is stupid. You should not worry about it if I do my job correctly. So before we start, a disclaimer and exercise in pretension. A while ago, well, long ago, there was a video called, discussing whether Homestuck is the Ulysses of the internet. And it's a good video, but I think Homestuck is more akin to another James Joyce work, which is Finnegan's Wake. And in that vein, I will read a bit from Dr. Sam Sloat's introduction to Finnegan's Wake, which you should keep in mind in this discussion of classpecting. Yes, I swear this is relevant, and when I say the Wake, assume I'm saying Homestuck. The Wake may be challenging, but chains of association can build and something like progress can be made. Familiarity with the Wake helps, but the best way to gain that familiarity is from reading the text itself, and not necessarily from secondary critical sources such as this. When reading the Wake, there can be an urge to turn to reference works to help explain and unpack the unfamiliar verbiage. But often, the result of such information does not really help elucidate the text that much, and besides, it conveys the impression that the book is just one big riddle, written with smaller riddles, to be deciphered and decoded. While external information can be helpful, its use and potential relevance is somewhat circumscribed. In the preface to the third edition of his annotations, Roland McHugh makes a brilliant suggestion as to how the reader should deal with approaching the Wake. The concepts of translation and decoding are to be avoided. X does not equal Y, rather Y should be borne in mind when reading X. Whatever else it may or may not be, the Wake is not information and thus cannot be reduced or explained by mere data. Yeah. So, in light of this, classpects are severely vibe typing. It's probably best understood to just read Homestuck and be like, yeah, I can see the connection between those people. You can cross-reference characters and motifs associated with a class or aspect and gain your own understanding. And most of this really is word association. You will associate something different with the words. You will have a different reading of the characters. This is just supplementary material. It can help give a lens, but it is not absolute. Supplemental material helps, but it cannot solve classpecting for you. So, none of what I'm going to say is definitive. It is the read of someone who has engaged with this for a long time, but I claim neither truth, nor relevance, nor essentiality. All I do is provide a lens Y, which you might hold to X, and hopefully find something interesting. Andrew Hussey is the most dead any writer has ever been, and has willingly surrendered control over canonicity. His intent is unknowable, and therefore irrelevant. All we have is the text and everything outside of it. Clear? Good. I hope this was the most voidy preamble to an explanation ever. So let's actually start now. There will have been a timestamp to jump to here. So, classpect is obviously a portmanteau of class and aspect. But these aren't like something with MBTI, where you are maybe a thinking type and a sensing type or whatever, and these in themselves help you. Like, you could only know that someone is sensing, and that tells you something about that person. Here, they're a lot more closely interdependent. So, let's give an example. Like, there's the thing called the extended zodiac, which is a canon thing which is a test you can do to get your aspect. And your lunar sway, what that is, we'll get to. The thing is that people who share an aspect are probably too dissimilar to be typed the same thing by a quiz like that. I'll explain what I mean. So, the class is kind of like a mode, and the aspect is a topic to which this mode is applied. Let's take the topic of fire. You can have two guys. One is an arsonist, the other is a firefighter. They have the same topic, but their mode is completely different. Their mode is really interdependent to what they're doing. So if they took this quiz, the quiz would probably not type the firefighter as a fire guy, because they are antagonistic towards fire. They would type him as maybe a water guy, because firefighters sometimes use water. But that's not really what they're about. They're still about fire. So keep that in mind when we talk about the aspects, that when you read one of them and they really piss you off, like you hate that thing, you want to destroy it, that it might be that you are just a firefighter for that aspect. That might still be your aspect. That's kind of my criticism of the extended zodiac. We'll get back to it because it is very useful in other ways. So, the aspects. These 12 things, they make up the universe within the webcomic, which is Homestuck. They don't make up the real universe. Probably. We don't know. You are an avatar of one of them, which means that you are X-bound, an X-player, or an hero of X. We probably won't say hero of X because, I mean, you will get a pretentious-sounding mythological role, but hero of X is just a step too far, I guess. And they stand in specific relation to each other. What these relations are, we will get to. Let's take this clockwise, starting from the top, with breath. Breath is free, it's unshackled, it's uplifting, it's hard to tie down or put in a box. It's about humor, flexibility, and team play. And below here, I won't read those, but these are little excerpts from the Extended Zodiac. Which is what it is good for. It is good to just read about the aspects. Not to let it assign one to you, but read what they're about and then decide if you are about that. Life, next to it, is about healing, growth, care. It's empathetic, it's about self-sacrifice, it's kind of about structure and achievement. So you might think about it as in, like, protecting growth, like, building a helpful environment in which things might prosper. That is the sense in which it is about structure. Sort of arborescent in nature. It's sort of hierarchical, like helping a tree grow, something. Okay, light. Light is analytical, it's about luck, narrative, sometimes morbidly curious, it's intense and rebellious. It's often detached through this knowledge, it's more just understanding without being part of, aloof in that way, and it's more about the discovery side of knowing. We'll get to that later with mind. Like, the kind of knowing that light is about is like, sailing off and exploring the world yourself, as opposed to, like, just learning about it. Time. Time is productive, it's fast-paced, it's about change. Time is kind of the aspect of workaholics. It's about evolution, destruction, and artifacts. It's struggle, death, and escape from it. It's focus. But time is kind of this collapsing force. It's about efficiency, getting things done. Time is running away from you. You are running away from time. You have to get shit done. That's what time is. Heart. Heart is about the self, the soul, and relationships. It's often about crafted persona, like it's about the self as perceived from the outside. They'll tend to splinter or begin to role play or these kind of things, like different lenses you can take to the self. Very self-obsessed people often. It's about bonds, empathy, and projection onto others. Rage is about destruction, anger, dramatics, theater, and ruthless purity. It's detached freedom. You're holding a mirror to society. It's going, this is not good enough, let's tear it all down, no matter what comes afterwards. That's the domain of the hope player to decide what comes next. Rage is just saying, burn it all down. It's not good enough, it's not perfect, there are flaws. Fuck it. Blood. That is about trust, organization, leadership, communality, it's struggle and martyrdom. It's opposition and its groups. And we remember Breath was already kind of about team play, all that kind of stuff. And Blood is also somewhat that, but Blood is more about the organizing part. It's having a group and building something off it, making it work better, improving it, organizing all these disparate people, whereas Breath is more about granting them freedom to interact with each other in a more untethered manner. Doom is about fate, it's about finality, about accepting that you're just fucked. It's about pessimism, defeatism, coping. They're healers of the miserable, as the Extended Zodiac somewhat puts it. Like, they'll commiserate with you rather than offering you ways to help. That's for positive interaction with Doom. Like, we'll get to the classes, but again, if you hate these things, you also might be that thing. And it's kind of impersonal. Like, that's just, the narrative has been written. This is how it will play out. You're not focusing on the individual actors. It's more big picture. That's why it's on the space side as opposed to the time side. Void. Void is about lack, it's about obfuscation, the unknowable, hiding, esoterics, obscurity, subjectivity, potential, and doubt. That's what I meant about that interlude where I'm saying, we don't know anything, this is extremely vibey, I'm not giving you truth, don't believe that I'm giving you truth. Because, yeah, we have no set source of that knowledge. And that's a way you can juxtapose it to light. Like, a light player might be very upset that no one could tell them if they are right, that they can never know if they are right about something like this. Whereas the Void player would be more upset if someone did tell them. That would kind of take the fun out of speculating. Space is about creation, composition. It's about neutrality, the big picture, motherhood, distance, complexity, and vastness. Space is this sprawling out, whereas time is the collapsing inwards. So yeah, if time is the workaholic, then space is the scatterbrained artist, expanding in all different directions and maybe not all that keen on finishing projects. Mind. Mind is about knowledge, understanding, order, rules, systematization, choice, rationality, and interdependence. If heart is looking at the self from all different angles and figuring things out through subjectivity, mind is more about like attempting to see yourself and others rationally, attempting to not be restrained by your own understanding and put yourself in a bigger context as everyone else is. Attempts at objectivity. Whether that exists in your mind or not, at least trying to be, is mind. And also trying to find systems, patterns. Everyone does that to some extent, of course, but mind is more about that. Hope. Hope is about fiction, aspiration, goodness, idealism, purity, morality, conviction, and imagination. It's again the purity of rage, but as we said, it's more constructive. It's the building back up the hope for the future as opposed to the what we have to do in the now to level, to tabula rasa everything and build anew. So yeah, we can already kind of see these dichotomies along the chart, how they stand in relation to each other. Back to the extended zodiac. This is a quiz, as I said, you can take on the internet right now, and it will assign you a class. It's an aspect. It's better than random chance, but yeah, I wouldn't put money on the result being correct. But it gives a nice explanation of the aspects, which you can read and type yourself. A lot of what was just on these slides is taken from there. It's canon, if you care about that. It's written by Aisha Yufara, who's really cool. And it assigns you one of those neat little signs, like here's mine, the sign of the hidden, which is, you learn what Durs is, the aspect of void. And yeah, these are the kind of descriptions it will give you. They're really nice. They're more long form than what I just did, so I'd recommend reading up on it. A link is in the description. Yeah, aspects stand in specific relations to each other. Not every player will display all these aspect tendencies, and they're more pronounced with increasing distance from the dividing line. What dividing line? This is one slice we can do through the chart, for example. We'd have on the space side, the being, analyzing, comprising, the cautious and the restrained. It's often described as like the passive side of the chart. It's more this sprawling out things exist out there. Hope, really, you're hoping, you're not doing much. Mind is about analyzing, again, as opposed to doing, and mind is about analyzing in this more distanced, more academic way, where light is about exploration, which is more timey, more active. Space is obviously almost inert. It just is. It's vast and it is. Same for void. And doom it's resigned by nature, as the fatalism of the story already having been written. You can only act out your part. Whereas the exact opposite is true for the things on the other side. It's about acting, it's about seeking, confronting. It's efficient and it's direct. And we can see that blood and breath are on this middle line there. In their like more team play nature, they don't have a strong leaning in either direction. That's why they are good at keeping the chart together. We can also do this. Draw another line through space and time this time. And then we have breath on the side of the ideal, of the abstract, the divine and the optimistic. Again, the more up it is from the line, the more strongly these attributes apply. And the same for the lower side of the chart, which is about the real, the material, the human, and the pessimistic. Also, something I should have maybe said. Like, here, other people would also put put subjectivity and objectivity on the sides of this chart. I don't think that's right. I don't like it, but just giving another take that exists out there. Okay, now we have the dichotomies. Aspects on opposite sides of the circle form dichotomies. We already explained kind of the light void, which is obscuring, and one idea you could bring up is the unknown in the Star Trek context. Like, light is about the unknown in the Star Trek way. There is something out there which you don't know yet, and you're gonna find and you're gonna figure it out. Whereas void would be kind of disappointed once they figured it out. For void, it's way cooler that there are unknowable things lurking in the darkness. We already kind of did space and time, where space is the expansive sprawling out, many interconnected ideas, whereas time is the focusing down to a pinpoint, getting shit done, moving quickly, and more active as opposed to time's passivity. Mind, again, is the objective and the drawing connections, the trying to stand outside yourself, whereas heart is obsessed with the self and with human connections and not so much with the greater context or anything outside the human. Then rage about tearing down everything, being upset that things are not perfect, whereas hope is about, hope for the future, thinking that things might improve or trying to improve them actively. Blood is about organizing, constructing environments for everyone to work together in. It's kind of about martyrdom. It's about using yourself to fix the system you exist in, fixing groups mostly. Like both of these are group aspects. Whereas breath is about this complete aloof freedom that blood players might be aspiring towards, but that's not what they would use to achieve it. Doom is about finality, everything ceasing at some point, knowing what will happen, all the dominoes are laid out, it's just a matter of watching them fall, whereas life is about this upward growth, the story being in the process of being written, things being able to change and facilitating an environment in which they can be different. And that was the entire circle. Nice. This kind of reminds of the magic chart, magic colors, and I don't get those. It's just a thing that has been brought to my attention. And all these sub-symmetries can definitely be drawn on this chart, and people have done that. I will go into some more of those, because I think they're quite illuminating. I'll have to talk a bit about Homestuck now. I'm very sorry. Space and time are the only aspects actually necessary to win at the game in Homestuck. All the other aspects are kind of peripheral. So a thing you can do is see the other aspect pairs as parallels to this primary dichotomy. So then we can ask, okay, what are these parallels? Hope and life are both about beginning and growth. And hope is the spacey take on that concept, whereas life is the timey take, the more active, the more action-focused. And the same for mind and light, where we already said that mind is more of this academic knowledge exists out there, finding it, finding out about it, whereas light is the more active, more exploratory, going out there and finding it yourself. But they're both concerned with knowledge and objectivity. Space and time is the primary, and then void and heart are both about subjectivity and feeling. Again, heart being the time take on it, and void being the space take on it. Where void is kind of space conceived of from the perspective of the individual. Because it doesn't really matter to you that everything exists out there from any one point within space. It's gonna seem hella fucking empty, and there's a lot out there you don't know. It's the personal perception of the real as opposed to the real itself. And for heart, how heart is about subjectivity and feeling is pretty obvious. And finally, for doom and for rage, it's about finality and decay. With doom being the more absolute grand narrative take, and rage being the active tearing things down take. And that again leaves breath and blood as these mediator aspect, which are precisely between the two main aspects which are necessary and therefore can bring a game session together to actual fruition. It's probably a good idea to have a blood or a breath player in your friend group. Okay, intermission. Questions. This is it for aspects.
So, since all two-axis systems are the same, you divided the chart in half in two different ways. Are there any insights, do you think, that would be better revealed by laying those two divisions in half over top of them?
I don't think there is any structure that is not contained within the circle. I think you can glean any information that exists at all from this if you subdivide it in any number of ways. Yes, you can probably draw a conclusion if you do that. As I said, there are so many like secondary dichotomies and ideas of how triangles of aspects can interact with each other. That's going to be too advanced for this lesson, but it exists and you can pretty easily find it. Taz Optimistic Duelist has a lot of videos on stuff like that, and is a cool guy who gets classpecting, definitely. Wait a sec, I have to... This is still a Neurotypeline video. Okay.
Dang. I'll have to come back with another thing. I opened this before hunger scores. I guess the closest thing is I'm gonna tear the tab off. There we go. Now it's just gonna be sharp and threatening.
Excellent. Anyone else have questions? Or are we gonna move on to classes? Doesn't sound like it. Okay. It's gonna get worse. Yeah, we already have that. Classpect is class plus aspect, where the aspect is the theme of your life, kind of, and the aspect is the theme of your life, and class is the interaction with that theme. Classes are literally archetype. They're taken from literature. They're literary archetypes, and literally archetypes. And they're a lot less understood for a reason we'll get to now, because we can lay out all the... As I said, this is vibe typey. None of this is explained, it's only characters guessing about how it works. And those characters only have other characters as reference points, which makes this whole thing really fucking convoluted. And really subjective from reading to reading of the characters, what their aspect means, and so on. But, so, it would seem like aspects and classes would be similarly easy to do, because there are about as many characters per class as there are per aspects. Sure, there are 2 extra classes here, but that shouldn't play too much of a role. But we have these guys. We have a bunch of characters who were assigned an aspect, but not a class. So we have a lot more reference points for aspects. Yeah. So that's kind of why they are less understood. There's less examples, and again, you just have to kind of go by, well, someone feels like these characters roundabout. But again, we can do word association with the names of these classes, and there are definitely similarities between the people who occupy them. So, let's try to explain these. Seers. Steadfast and stubborn will go out their way to prove you wrong. Seers are about trying to understand their aspects. They are pretentious and obtuse. They observe as opposed to act, and they are rigorous and obsessive. They're somewhat self-absorbed. Like, peak seer behavior includes staking your life on the assumption that you're probably right, attempting to outsmart gods, and the belief that the only reason people don't agree with you is that you have not said enough words at them yet. A seer of light might accept a Faustian bargain in which they sell their soul to the old gods in return for a different way of looking at the framework they exist in. They can be kind of self-destructive in their attempts to understand differently. If I want to give like a good example of a seer in popular culture, I'd pick Dr. Jan Faust of Faust as a seer of space. I'm going to do this for all the aspects because there will be people watching who have not seen Homestuck, and so going by, well, you're like those characters doesn't really benefit them much. So I'm trying to get pop culture examples which are very definitively a certain class. As become or are carried by their aspect. This one's a bit... I don't like this one as much. It's lame nerds with a bit of a temper, very powerful, but the strength can lead to their downfall. They are often shaped by a system, they navigate the unfamiliar, and they're sort of unrestrained avatars of their aspect. Like, they sort of have an air, get it, of naturality about them. They just exist. An heir might only realize that they underwent a massive character arc in retrospect. They flow like water. Their friends might bring up some issue and they go, yeah, I can do that, then help them. That's just what they do. It's very much something happens, they react. They're immediate. They have, as I said, an air of naturality to them. If someone brought up their aspect, and you can immediately say that someone is an heir, they just fit into that framework so perfectly. An heir of breath might become the de facto centerpiece of their friend group while hardly doing anything. It's just someone who vibes around and people like them. And the Doctor from Doctor Who is pretty consistently an heir in all incarnations. The aspect sort of varies. He's an heir of time, obviously, a lot, but I'd say that some incarnations are also more mind, hope, or light. But he's always someone who acts immediately, who just fits perfectly into any situation. That's what he's built around. He has to be that kind of character. So yeah, Doctor for an heir. Pretty obvious. Witches. Loyal and supportive to friends, ruthless towards enemies. Never forget a grudge. Run. Witches manipulate their aspects. They are rule breakers. They are escape providers sometimes. They often will take in people in a certain way to protect them from the negative consequences of their aspect. They're taskmasters and they fuck. Witches fuck. This is a common trend. I don't know why. It's laid out in the comic. It's what happens. Witches fuck. Witches are often kind of different from everyone else in their upbringing, in their station in society, which leads to them to having a different way of relating to people. They often don't quite get social structure, and so they might just judge that it doesn't quite apply to them, or do their own thing anyways because they think it's stupid. A witch of life might just effectively break death for everyone. Fuck the rules, fuck the consequences, you gotta help your friends. They can often be kind of black and white in their thinking, and a good example of a witch is Misato Katsuragi from Evangelion, who is a witch of blood. Also, side note, some people would argue that witches are a gendered class, that you have to be a woman to be a witch. That is not true. Callie is an unreliable narrator. Callie did not understand how gender worked when she said that. There are no gendered classes. If you're a guy, you can be a witch. I'm sorry. This might be a hot take to some people, but there are no character types which require you to be a certain gender. This shouldn't be a hot take, really. Yeah, and there's still a good article on why certain classes are gender biased by Argus, called Homestuck Classes on the Patriarchy. That's really nice, it's a good read, don't worry, it's not a 15-minute read, it's maybe 10 minutes, unless you're a very slow reader. Also linked in the video description. Knights. Insecure but highly trustworthy. Hurt their loved ones and you're guaranteed dead. Knights weaponize their aspect, they are protective and loyal. They often have a kind of guarded image, like you can see two of these people are wearing shades right now. Which also evokes the imagery of, well, a knight. It's armor, it's guarding them, it's being sort of protected. They are cautious and strategic, and they're often kind of hard-headed and stuck in their ways. A knight might interact with the world completely through some crafted persona, and out of time might have 5 billion projects going on, all of which are impersonal and all of which are future-oriented. For example, look at Sweet Bro and Hello Jeff, Dave's comic, which isn't really about what it is right now, it's about the back references it could make later. It's about further degrading ever more. It's about the evolution from the get-go. It's about the interconnection of projects. It's about where you go with it as opposed to what it is right now. There's a lot of it, it's the workaholic archetype again, and it doesn't really give you that much insight into Dave's character. It's just a thing he does because he wants it to exist, not because it says much about him. And he wants people to think that he is sincere about it, which he kind of is. It's hiding behind a bit of armor, often. But yeah, they're loyal friends. They're good. And Bella Swan from Twilight is a Knight of Doom, fuck you. I'm serious about that, but a more conventional example might be the Batman as a Knight of Void. Pages. Pages are a huge dog with self-esteem issues. Please protect them. Pages provide the aspect they are about potential. They're underdogs, they're naive and oblivious. They're dedicated to growth. Pages are often kind of hard to discuss because they are so much about becoming as opposed to what they are right now, almost in a timey kind of way. Pages might not be the most self-sufficient of people. They might be shat on for just that, but their strength lies in getting people to care enough about them to help them with those aspects in which they are lacking. People tend to accumulate around a page, and that sense of becoming they have is inspiring. Before they know it, they might have an army at their disposal and a wellspring of lessons they learned to teach, which is like such a dead ringer for Steven Universe, from Steven Universe, who is a page of heart. It's probably the best example you could ever find for like an ascended page, someone who actually grows out of that stage of having people to help them and becomes the helper. Princes. Princes are often self-destructive. Princes have self-destructive tendencies, often have relationship issues, and a possible hair. Princes destroy their aspect. They are single-minded and controlling. They are individualistic and perfectionist. Princes are almost kind of solipsistic in nature, where witches often just don't fully get the social paradigm and pretend it doesn't apply to them. Princes get it and fully deem it irrelevant. They are the person, and everyone else just exists around them. Sometimes useful, sometimes as obstacles. A Prince of Heart might make an eye of themselves to manage their social interactions, so they can spend more time thinking about and improving themselves. BBC's Sherlock is an obvious Prince of Mind. Keep in mind, different interpretations of Sherlock have different classpects. It's very specifically this one who is a Prince of Mind. A lot of them aren't quite the level of asshole required to be a prince. I'm also trying to find positive examples for all of these classpects because in the text, most princes are antagonists. All princes are antagonists, and others are too, but you can imagine a good prince. And Sherlock is maybe a weirdo, but a good guy, essentially. Thieves. Hard-working and spunky, with a go-get-em attitude, also manipulative and self-centered. Thieves steal their aspect for self. Oh, that's not right. Thieves did nothing wrong. They kind of interact in grandiose gestures. They are reckless and dangerous. Thieves may sometimes seem similar to princes in their behavior, but here it's more an active desire to outdo others, to win. Because of that, they're way more likely to put others on a pedestal, like a goal to surpass, where a prince, again, is the person, other people just exist around them. A thief of life might kill themselves and all their friends without asking, because that's what had to happen to save the universe, and everyone else was too much of a coward to do it. If someone did something wrong, if someone did nothing wrong, ever, and people keep insisting that they did, they're probably a thief. A thief of blood would be Katja from She-Ra, who might have done some things wrong. Maids. Maids are sweet and caring. Do not piss them off or you will die. Maids serve their aspect. They are often in rebellion against the system. They are self-indulgent and supportive. And that self-indulgent really carries quite a bit of weight here. There's a joke in the comic that, like the other spelling of maid, M-A-D-E, a maid of time is literally just time. They are made of time. Because maids are probably the most fascinated with their aspects, to the complete neglect of social niceties. They are in some ways like anti-witches, witches in reverse. Where witches are kind of odd people who through their aspects find a role in society, which fits with the whole image of the witch, of like someone who's off in the forest, they're not quite part of the social construct, but people still go there to get medicine and such. They are an appreciated outsider, they're necessary. They're just kind of weird. Maids could be normal, but the obsession makes them not quite fit in. A maid of time might become so fascinated with change and decay that they see death as a cool thing to be celebrated, just do corpse parties and such. Or a maid of life might instate a fascist government to make sure structure and a healthy environment prevail. A good example of a maid in pop culture would be Daenerys Targaryen as the Maid of Rage. Mages. The inner machinations of their minds are an enigma. Mages know through their aspects. They are abrasively hard to get often. This is probably the hardest class to read from the comic, because both these people who we have as reference points don't do that much. They suffer from their aspects and benefit others through it, kind of the lessons they've learned the hard way. A class of contradictions through that. Like, the aspect has never done anything good for them, but that can help them help others with it. Mage-like behavior is hard, but its clearest form is often sometimes in the figure of a mentor. They don't lend themselves well to being a primary protagonist. A mage of heart might suffer incredibly in a relationship and emerge as an incredible matchmaker and benefit others through what they failed at. And it is very much the story of Uncle Iroh in Avatar, who I would classpect as a mage of breath. Someone who suffered from not having that kind of freedom and then imparting it on others later on, while still suffering from his own failures. Sylphs. Passionate and eager to help. Prefer order and reason, but will wreck shit to further ambitions. Sylphs heal and mend. They are dangerous, the aspects. They are dangerously competent. They are puppeteers often. They are very unassuming, so people don't know they're being manipulated, and they change the world to their advantage. The changing of the sylph is more a nudging, and not a particularly active affair. That's where the manipulation comes in. They very much see themselves as adhering to, like, a Socratic oath of sorts. They're healing through changing, but of course others might disagree that what they're healing in the world is actually a thing to be healed. And part of their competence is not that they are somehow exceptionally more clever than other classes, but that they're good at finding receptive targets, often the people who need healing. And Dumbledore in Harry Potter is a sylph of life. Life being about growth, furthering development in their students, but having their own machinations in the backside, and themselves not being very much the active participant in that. Rogues. Rogues are cheerful, friendly, and often underestimated. Rogues distribute their aspects. They are charming, have a roguish charm, if you will. They're isolated but social. They are very autonomous, very self-sufficient, often living like in a cave somewhere, eating animals, or in a dystopian future, living off pumpkins and feeding aliens. It's just what they do. They can get along well, and they're conflict averse. Adverse to conflict doesn't mean they won't stand up against injustice. They may very well be the first to kick off a rebellion, but they will seek to avoid squabbling amongst friends. A rogue of heart might set up role-playing sessions for everyone to step outside themselves, craft a new identity, and interact without bias on a level playing field. Just get people to step outside themselves, interact as though they did not already know each other and how they may not like each other. And Robin Hood is an obvious example of a rogue of hope in this case. And lastly, bards. Bards are weird assholes who shouldn't be trusted, should probably be protected from themselves. Bards fuck with their aspects. They are laid back. They are kind of misplaced. Like, they don't quite fit into the system they're in, or anywhere, really. They are religiously dedicated, and they allow the destruction of their aspect. They are, like, meant to be born in any universe but this one. Reality is not their cup of tea. a bard of rage might get so consistently high that he mellows out completely, only to utterly snap when his escape to the self-constructed reality is stripped away, and then go to outright facilitate the end of reality proper. A more positive example of a bard is Okabe from Steins Gate, a bard of light. And a not quite positive, but also not horrible example is the Dude, who is a bard of time. That's it for the classes. Not quite, because there are also the master classes, the Lord and the Muse. The Lord being the most active class and the Muse being the most passive class. They command their aspect, and they're too tied to their aspect to really be people. I don't believe that anyone who's not incredibly divergent could be a Lord or a Muse, but because they're just perfect avatars of their aspect. They are a force of nature with regard to their aspect. To be a Lord or a Muse, you have to fuck up your session to a degree where you don't have enough people in it. It's hard to be one of those, and I don't think normal functioning people could be. Or even not normal, not functioning people could be. People aren't that. The only examples of lords and muses we have are extraterrestrial snake monsters. Literally. Class pairs. Did you really think they would come without some symmetry? Of course they do. It's like the aspects. And they are clustered around verbiages. Like, princes and bards both are destroyers, where princes are active and bards are passive. Active and passive in this case is kind of like offensive and defensive classes in an RPG, is how it's described early in the comic. Bards will allow a thing to happen, facilitate it, and princes will actively make it happen. Example, like the dude doesn't actively destroy time. It's just that time has no relevance to him, and he essentially negates time. By the end of the story, nothing has fundamentally changed. The whole purpose of time is negated through his existence. That's what bards do. That's kind of what passivity is. And how far they are along here, again, means how strongly active or passive they are. Active and passive can also be interpreted as active being doing something with their aspect to benefit themselves, whereas passive is more for others, so it's more social. I don't think that trend is quite as strong as the offensive-defensive class bit. Then we have a pair around steal, which is the thief and the rogue. This is mainly where this conception comes from, with the thief stealing for themselves and the rogue stealing for others. Mages and seers around know. Muses and lords around command. Pages and heirs about becoming. Knights and maids around serving. And sylphs and witches about changing their aspect. Again, sylphs more in the passive, healing, nudging way, and witches just doing magic upon reality. This chart is, of course, a rip-off of Optimistic Duelist's chart, which I made some slight edits to because I don't quite agree with it. But anyway, as I said, they do phenomenal work. Definitely worth a watch. And thanks for the chart template. Act 4. It just keeps fucking fractaling, dude. It just keeps fractaling. We'll start with Lunar Sway. So there's these moons, Durs and Prospit. And you have, well, if you were a person in the comic, you would have a dream self on one of those moons. So we can imagine this as like the subconscious influence upon your life. Like, you are not awake on that moon, probably. You'll just take in what it presents to you, and that will influence your waking life. And one of these is like close to the blackened abyss where the nothingness is, and one is close to the window of all information and hope and purpose in the story. And from color coding, I'm sure you can guess which is which. So, what are they about? Dearth is about rigidity from kind of black and white thinking. Dearth players are likely to be kind of on edge, never quite relaxed. They are rebellious, they are aloof, analytical, introverted, distrustful, and they think a lot about themselves and understand the self a lot better than the world around them. Whereas prospect dreamers are accommodating, they understand the world better than the self, which can be a problem for them. They just go with the flow, they're flexible, they are assured and intuitive. They're personable people usually, and trusting. These things are not all true for anyone who dreams on prospect or Dearth. You can be any combination of these. And a way of seeing it is to kind of counterbalance your classpect. So if you have like something deeply active, like a prince, that could be kind of mellowed out with the Dearth, with a prospect sway. And also there is precedent for people having a dream self on both of these moons. So maybe you just don't have a strong sway, maybe you're exactly in the middle. That also happens. So I don't think these are quite as useful as a normal classpecting, but they are a thing to consider. And for prospect or Dearth sway, the test on the extended zodiac is actually quite good. Because it's binary, there is no other factor playing into it. You can probably do that test and get a pretty solid result for if you are a prospect or a Dearth streamer. Also, these moons are at war, but don't worry about it. And Dearth, obviously, as the active rebellious side, is the attacker. Yeah. That's Dearth and prospect. Another thing to think about is aspect gradients. So, remember how I said that these aspects make up the universe? Well, obviously there are a lot more than 12 things in the universe. So, it's reasonable to assume that a lot of things are combinations of these. They have a leaning, like, I don't know, horses are strongly associated with the void aspect for some reason. So horses are probably quite voidy. But it's not everything, right? And so the same should probably be true for people who are, yes, heroes of an aspect, but they would not be completely that aspect. So one way of thinking of it is that you have an interaction, a mode, with every topic, because obviously you have to interact with all topics to some degree. So you might be a seer of space, but also then an heir of hope. But one of these will be stronger in your behavioral patterns, and that will be the top thing on your aspect gradients. That will be your actual title. But then you could have secondary and tertiary titles, one for each aspect, with the class with which you correspond to it. Then there's shadow or annihilator theory, which is the idea that if we look at the chart again, with dichotomies and such, any interaction with, let's say, life is at the same time like a negative interaction with doom. To pretend to be escaping, or to escape from some preset destiny is the same as counteracting doom. So, you will always kind of have a shadow. You interact with, if you're a hope player, if you're a life player, you interact with doom a lot. And that can backfire. Like, you will have a strong association with doom, and that is usually considered your shadow. Rose, in the comic, a light player, has a moment where she goes grimdark, slipping into the void side, negating everything she usually stands for. It's kind of like, at your lowest point, you might integer overflow into the reverse of your aspect. That's the thing that happens. And also there's the idea that different classes affect which aspect on the wheel you negatively influence. So maybe that heirs of time would not negatively influence space as much, but I don't know, maybe void. People have different takes on that, or if that exists at all. Most people agree that you have an interaction with the opposite thing on your dichotomy. And yeah, just read any fanfiction for a plethora of more takes and opinions on this, usually framed in a way where they will just have a character espouse their own theory. It's very funny. But you'll get a new appreciation for it. Now, another thing, which is true science / titles and role-playing, which is, on one of the planets in Homestuck, society is essentially built in such a way as to facilitate the coming about of people with a certain class spec, because they will have to be bred in a way to win the game. So anyone of their lineage cased will have to fulfill a certain role in society, which is useful to this role which should come about from their caste. And that's very applicable to just your family, your social surrounding. There is kind of a role you are thrust into in society, and whether that it comes naturally to you, whether that's a thing that you are good at dealing with, is kind of besides that. And you will, to some extent, have to learn to interact with that and to play that role. That is the mimicry of the true sign. So your true sign would be the thing that you would probably be most effective in your environment at if you wear that role. And yeah, you learn to mimic that, or maybe, if you're lucky, then you already are that role, in which case you almost have this airy sense of naturality, and you can just do things normally. That's cool. And that's an alternative to real secondary roles. You can just say, oh, this is a learned behavior, this is the true sign shining through, the thing that someone was expected to be and had to somehow learn mimicking. Yeah, enough self-serious bullshit. Additional classes and aspects, because, yeah, this system, we can read a lot of cool shit from it, but it's also very silly. Andrew Hussey, creator of Homestuck, typed himself as a waste of space, or the Huss of lips. He typed Nicolas Cage as the Nick of Time, and Fedora Freak, a person in the comic, as the Gent of Piss. So we can chuck those into the aspect wheel, and everything will be good. So, yeah, there's no reason to take this especially seriously, but there are cool things to be gleaned from it. You can choose your level of engagement. And this is still being discussed, as I said. I have no monopoly on truth here. A lot of people will disagree with a lot of takes in this video, which I'm fine with. It's still being discussed. You can contribute to the discussion anytime. Thanks for listening. This is it.
Can we ask questions now about the classes?
Yeah, sure.
I have a question because, this was sparked in my mind by your page description. You said the pages are about growth and stuff, and I thought there are also aspects that are about growth, and based on the dichotomy, that means there are aspects that are against growth. So, if you're a page of hope, let's say, the page is about growth, hope is also about growth. Do they stack? And if you're a page of rage, do they contradict? How do you reconcile this class and aspect overlap or contradiction?
They do stack. That is a thing, yes. That's what I meant with the Lunar Sway's sort of adding or counterbalancing stuff, because it plays into things which are also somewhat covered by the roles and aspects already. For page and stuff like life, which is about growth, there are different kinds of growth. Pages are about self-improvement, about growing into a role, where the growth that hope layers are about is more external. It's about fostering systems and such. It's not about the self. But for example, light is about knowledge and discovery, and seers are also very much about knowledge and discovery, and those two very much do stack. You can become more extreme through beneficial aspect class combinations. Yes. You can value these things against each other.
Yeah, a lot of them in the comics is what these stacks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they stack, but what if they contradict? Does that just mean that the growth in this means something completely different than the dichotomy in the aspect?
I mean, a good example would be, for example, a prince of pretty much any type, like a destroyer class of hope or life or something like that, would always occur, of course, go into the opposite. If you destroy life, that leads to doom, and if you destroy hope, that leads to rage. But for something more minor, for like thieves who steal their aspect, you can get something like, here, a thief of life who isn't that concerned about growth for others and more like expanding her empire, fucking people over in the process, and killing herself and all her friends to make things go on. That's still kind of about life because it's about the perseverance of the universe, but it's not life as you would. She's not a life player as you would picture it if you just knew about the aspect of life. So mostly those contradictions can be resolved by saying, okay, it's for that in one certain context and against that in another, or it's using that thing against itself, fighting fire with fire. That's also a combination which is, somewhat typical. Like, for example, Gamzee, a bard of rage who would use like this destroying, which is also associated with rage, against rage in the mellowing out, in the burning down the self, essentially, to be not as upset and being kind of a mellow guy until shit happens. You can direct rage against rage, you can...
So how do you determine that? Do you do like an average, or... Because as you said about thieves of life, for example, they seem to, by stealing life, they seem to display doom more often, or that's how I understand it anyway. So, like, do you do like an average to see when are they for or against, or how do you determine exactly, or you can?
As I said, like, classes are more behavioral patterns, and there is no class for which Mina would act like a typical Doom player. She just acts like a thief. She puts on thievish behavior, which, as I said, is about this recklessness, this dangerous, grandiose gestures, all that stuff, doing nothing wrong, all that good shit. And then, okay, what is she stealing? And that would then be hope. Would then be life. But for Doom, like, she's not an heir of Doom. She's not a thief of Doom. She's nothing of Doom.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, they are different categories. They just sometimes interact with the same theme.
Last qualifying question. Could you just say then that classes are like external and aspects are more internalized or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. Classes are more in your behavior. Aspects are more in what you care about. Yeah.
If you're trying to type yourself, do you think it's easier to start with, well, what classes do I use to relate to each aspect? Or is it easier to look at an aspect and be look through all the aspects and be like,
I think it varies from person to person. I think you can't say, okay, am I an heir? And then go through all and say, yes, now go through all the aspects and pick which one you're an heir of. I don't think that would work. But you could definitely go through the aspects and seeing, oh, which one do I relate to a lot? And once you find one, you can go, oh, boom, I'm an heir. Obviously, that's what I am. So it depends what your combination is, which one is easier to find it, which direction to go. But in general, I'd say for typing yourself, it's easier to start with an aspect. And for typing others, it's easier to start with a class. Because, as I said, like, classes are more external, it's your behavior, and others will be better at judging that, whereas what you care about, you are better at judging. In general. But as I said, what is actually easier depends on what type you are. Yeah, go ahead. Someone else wanted to ask something related to that?
Yeah, it was a sort of a related question. I kind of feel like you already answered it, but about having, like, secondary and tertiary classes and aspects, would it be correct to say that you technically have interactions and are classifying with every aspect, but you only have a strong enough affinity for, like, one or two of them for them to be, like, relevant enough that you would assign them to yourself?
Yeah, I don't think many people have I don't think many people are that spread thin across the spectrum. I think you have like a strong decline. I don't think anything after the tertiary is remotely important. Actually, I think you can get a strong picture just going by your primary class spec. And there being like these aspect gradients, that's highly heterodox. Most people would not agree that that is a thing. I think it's somewhat interesting, but I don't think they're necessary for the most part. Like, obviously you have a relation with all these other aspects. You have to. But I think it's kind of just, oh, I want to have another cool title to pick another one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's not exactly what I was saying. It was more just like, you could technically say, like, this is my interaction that I have with this aspect.
Yeah.
Though I wouldn't, like, primarily type myself as this.
Yeah.
I got 2 questions, actually. Yeah. Do you think that either classes or aspects can change over time?
I'm gonna give a tentative yes-ish. Obviously they can't change in the comic. That's not a thing that could happen. But I think there is like an ultimate self. I think there is a person there is a class spec which you will eventually have. It just can't always be seen from the start, but I think it's pointless to say, oh, you were always that. It just couldn't be perceived, because at that point you just were not that thing if it cannot be perceived, if you are not perceivably that thing. So I think there is a role you grow into, which then stays steady, but I think that that development can only come in adulthood. It can come pretty late, especially for pages. I think a lot of people start out as kind of pagey and then develop into something else. A lot of young people are folks you would type as pages. And then they grow out of it. Or they stay pages and become ascended pages, like Steven Universe. So yeah, it can change, but I think at some point in your life it stays solid. Again, controversial take. Most people would probably say it stays completely solid.
Alright. Yeah, I think I get it. And then the other one was specifically about a character that you typed, Okabe from Steins Gate. About, you put him as Bard.
Yeah, Bard of Light.
Yeah. I think it's mostly like about like my vibe of him, but like it feels like kind of Okabe is kind of a character that's like outgoing. He's kind of always doing his own thing. So like, why exactly would you type him as like a passive character, specifically like a bard who's like considered like one of the most passive characters?
Bards are passive, but as I said, not in the way that they don't do anything. Gamzee, a bard of rage, essentially ends the universe, brings about the destruction of the universe. They can be active in the sense that they do things. It's more like, what spurs them on? Is it themselves or is it an external force? And it seems a lot of the time like Christina is the one who actually forces him to do things. It's stuff happening in his friend group that forces him to act, where usually he'd be perfectly content just sitting in his lab and fucking with machinery. And he's specifically a bard of light, in that, like, light, again, is about discovery, finding out stuff, but the way he puts it, with his wild theories, which often turn out to be correct, which is also a light thing, but they are not really scientifically relevant or anything. They cause people to put him off as, like, a lunatic. He specifically obfuscates how things work, framing everything as magic and a conspiracy. He obfuscates while interacting with this pure knowledge of time travel and these things they're figuring out. So that's why he's a bard.
Alright, yeah, I see.
Passive destroyer of light. Yeah.
Alright, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, then that was the first Neurotypeline lecture. I hope there will maybe be more of these. I don't have one more to make, but it would be interesting to have many different character typologies to cross-reference in understanding this one. And to anyone who came here from Homestuck circles, I don't know, stick around for neurotyping. No. Yeah, I hope this was insightful. I hope I did a good job of explaining this both for people who have not read Homestuck and putting enough tidbits in there for people who have read Homestuck to further their understanding of the text. And yeah, I hope this was entertaining.